Did you know that Mordovian Corrective Labor Colony for women is considered the harshest in Russia? It's often compared to the Black Dolphin. What about cases of sexual assault among female inmates in this prison? Unfortunately, the harsh conditions are a common phenomenon in Russian prisons. Today you will learn about the lives of female offenders, what happens when an inmate gives birth, and the horrors that can occur behind the prison walls. The most terrifying prison for women in Russia is the Correctional Colony No. 2 in Mordovia. The facility is designed to accommodate approximately 500 people. The main difference between male and female prisons is that in the case of the former, life imprisonment is allowed, while the longest sentence for women is 25 years. However, the daily routine and rules in Colony No. 2 closely resemble those in male prisons like Zvezdochka or the Black Dolphin. By the way, we've also covered those in previous videos. So, at 6 a.m., the female offenders wake up. Women have a full hour for personal hygiene, after which they must assemble at 7 a.m. Following that, there's breakfast and the working day begins. Women work until evening, with breaks for lunch and dinner. Lights out is at 10 p.m., similar to male colonies. The conditions of the inmates are also similar. Women with sentences exceeding 20 years are not allowed to go outdoors, just like in strict regime male colonies. There's a specially designated indoor area with bars instead of a roof and concrete walls for their outdoor time. Besides, particularly dangerous criminals are always accompanied by a minimum of 3 people, including a guard with a dog, who must inspect the inmate cells before allowing them outside. Naturally, all these measures are taken for security reasons. The most significant difference in the treatment of female offenders compared to male offenders lies in their physiology. Women's bodily processes, such as the need to use the restroom, are more frequent. This situation becomes even more challenging if a woman has given birth, because she will need to use the restroom much more often. This poses a significant problem for Correctional Colony No. 2, as it is nearly at full capacity. Thus, female inmates often have to sleep on beds placed closely together to save space and accommodate more prisoners. The toilets in female cells are rarely different from those in male cells. It's entirely possible that they consist of just a hole in the floor without a proper toilet. Moreover, one toilet for a 10-person cell is entirely realistic in the conditions of a Russian prison. The specific features of this colony are quite interesting. To better understand the inclinations of the inmates towards certain actions such as suicide or escape, different colored flags are placed on the beds of the female offenders. Each color signifies a specific inclination. Yellow indicates a potential suicide risk, red represents a risk of escape, and blue signifies an inclination towards alcohol abuse. It's not uncommon for one bed to have several flags. These individuals require heightened supervision by the colony's administration, as they often become instigators of unrest. The colony also has special cells with a more lenient regime. Women who are soon to be released and those who have displayed good behavior are placed in these cells. There have been cases where individuals cooperating with the colony's administration also ended up in these cells. In the Correctional Colony for Women, there are workshops where inmates work. They sew clothing for various services, including the Federal Penitentiary Service, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and others. Female offenders work 8 hours a day with a 1-hour break for lunch. In addition to the production activities, the colony has its own garden where women can work. Another interesting fact is that women in the colony are allowed to cut their hair. They are not shaved bald, as is the case in regular male prisons. However, there are restrictions. For example, they cannot simply change their hairstyle. This requires written approval from the colony's administration. Additionally, dyeing hair or making significant changes to one hairstyle is prohibited. This rule serves a simple purpose. For each offender, there is a physical description used in case of an escape. This description includes height, weight, body type, hairstyle, hair color, and even facial features. Such an approach allows for the rapid identification of escapees. Perhaps the most unique feature of this colony is the presence of a special maternity ward. Surprisingly, childbirth takes place there, and afterward, women return to the children's homes and colonies with their babies. They do this under armed guard. During the day, the children wait for their mothers as if they were in a daycare center, while in the morning and evening, they are together with their parent. A child can stay with their mother in the prison for no more than 3 years, after which they must be transferred to relatives or a state-run children's home. Staying with the mother in prison is allowed only for those with very good behavior. Another prison specializing in housing women is located in the Vladimir region. Golovino Correctional Colony No. 1 is just half an hour's drive from the city. This prison is considered one of the oldest in the region, as it was established even before World War II. The daily life of the inmates here is not significantly different from other prisons. They wake up at 6 a.m., have an hour for personal hygiene, assemble, have breakfast, work, eat dinner, and lights out at 10 p.m. It's the same routine as everywhere else. The main difference used to be the type of work. In the past, inmates here were involved in logging, which was physically demanding. This labor has since been replaced by sewing production. Just like in Correctional Colony No. 2 in Mordovia, women in Golovino Correctional Colony sew clothing for various law enforcement agencies. As the inmates note, they don't really care what or for whom they're sewing, as they manufacture clothing even for the Federal Penitentiary Service, the very state agency that manages all the country's prisons. Even though women are incarcerated in this colony, no concessions are made to them. This is evident even during visits to the colony. Journalists have noted that upon entering the colony, everyone, including employees of the Federal Penitentiary Service, must leave their phones and any suspicious items at the checkpoint. Beyond that, everyone has to pass through 3 airlocks and surrender their passports. Naturally, all these measures are taken to prevent inmates from escaping and from receiving any items that could assist in such attempts. Since 2012, the colony has had a children's house and a cohabitation center. We've already discussed the children's house, but not the cohabitation center. So the cohabitation center is a building where children can stay. From the outside, it looks just like an ordinary daycare center, and the interior is no different. There are many toys, colorful furniture, everything designed for young children. Outside the entrance, there's even a playground with swings for the little ones, and inmates have planted flowers in the flower beds. In reality, if you don't pay attention to the barbed wire, you could almost forget that it's a prison. The colony frequently hosts various events aimed at helping the inmates. For instance, the female offenders often work together with a psychologist. There are even clubs with different activities. For example, there's an agriculture club where the inmates can work in the local garden. Thanks to the efforts of the female inmates, the territory of Golovino Women's Colony looks well maintained. Correctional Colony No. 7 in Ivanovo accommodates 550 inmates, and it houses only women. This prison was established in 1938, making it one of the oldest colonies in Russia. Most of the inmates end up here due to drug-related offenses, but there are also those imprisoned for robbery, theft, and even murder. One distinctive feature of Colony No. 7 is the presence of its own psychological laboratory. This is done to facilitate the ongoing work of psychologists with the inmates. The prison also has a reasonably large library, and it has cable television. However, the television channels are limited to religious programs and other shows approved by the administration. The colony has also established an evening school, which can be attended by all inmates under 30 years old. On the prison grounds, there's a medical unit and a small chapel. Work, as in other places, is mainly centered around sewing production. Based on this information, you might not think that any horrors can occur in Russian prisons. However, it's important to note that women's prisons aren't significantly different from men's prisons, where beatings and manipulation also take place. All of these aspects are present in women's prisons as well. Of course, Russian prisons are not without their share of horrors. Much has been said about the poor conditions of confinement, which are often linked to old prison buildings where it's damp and cold. Many problems also arise due to overcrowding, as there's simply no room to place all the inmates. From here stem the following problems: unsanitary conditions and diseases. All of this applies not only to men's prisons, but also to facilities designed specifically for women. But the horrors of women's prisons don't stop there. For instance, many former inmates note the prevalence of violence in the workshops. A woman may come to the factory, for example, without knowing how to operate a sewing machine, and the production has a quota. So until the inmate meets that quota, she won't be allowed to leave, and if the work is done poorly, she might even be beaten. Many female offenders have recounted that some inmates were kept working on production well past midnight, and those who refused to work were subjected to physical violence, often of a nature that even men wouldn't endure. Not everyone can endure all these abuses. As a result, suicide attempts are common in prisons. In women's prisons, this often happens right in the sewing workshops. The reason is that there are quite a few sharp objects there, which the desperate inmates may use in suicide attempts. Usually this happens during meal breaks when everyone else leaves and someone who hasn't met their quota is left alone. Such horrors are frequent in all prisons. One woman shared a story from her time in prison. There was a girl who was frequently subjected to abuse, beatings, and was generally not allowed to live in peace. Because of this, she hanged herself with a pair of tights. The prison staff who witnessed this not only didn't try to save her, but simply left the poor girl to die and talked about her as if she were some object. In fact, such attitudes are often encountered. Indifference and cruelty are what unite prison staff. Even in men's prisons and detention centers, there are instances of rape. But in women's correctional facilities, this issue has become paramount. Such incidents happen quite frequently. Some wardens who have previously committed such crimes are quite capable of repeating them. Furthermore, no one will be able to prove these crimes since inmates' opinions are almost never considered. One inmate shared that at her facility there was a pig farm and a dairy production plant to which people were often sent without an escort. This meant that women heading to work were left entirely unprotected. There was an employer at the plant who had previously served time for rape. Rumors began to circulate that this man was sexually assaulting the unfortunate women. It's hard to believe, but it's true. At one point, this employer became so confident in his impunity that he started inviting acquaintances to join in the abuse. Some girls, tired of the abuse, deliberately violated rules to be removed from work. But even that didn't help, as such violations often led to further abuse. These kinds of stories are quite common in Russian women's prisons, which is frankly alarming. Oryol Women's Correctional Colony fits the description of the terrible prisons in Russia. If you read comments or reviews about the conditions in daily life, you'll find many angry complaints about the violation of various rules. For example, many inmates can be deprived of phone calls with their relatives if something doesn't sit well with a particular work brigade. But the prison staff doesn't stop at that. Violence is often applied against female inmates, and health problems are often disregarded. Many inmates know that it's very difficult to receive proper medical treatment in this colony. If you have a 39-degree fever, they won't allow you to rest from work. Instead, they'll give you a paracetamol tablet and send you back to the production line. Injuries are also often ignored since they can just be brushed aside. This is how the health of inmates is generally treated in all prisons. Fortunately, at Oryol Women's Colony, there haven't been any reported cases of rape. At least none of that have become public. It's possible that behind prison walls such incidents have become commonplace and are carefully hidden, which is even more terrifying. We now have a better understanding of how prisons are not significantly different from men's correctional facilities. But what do detention centers for women look like? They are quite similar, but there are far fewer of them. For example, in Moscow, there is only one detention center, number 6, designated for women. The cells are fairly clean and resemble small rooms with benches attached to the walls, a toilet and a sink tucked in the corner. However, what happens to inmates next might shock you. Upon arrival, they need to fill out a suspect card. This card contains all the individual's information, such as height, weight, facial features, hairstyle, and distinctive characteristics like birthmarks, scars, and moles. This information is necessary for quickly identifying the suspect in case of an escape. Afterward, there is a check for prohibited items. The person is asked to undress and squat. This humiliating procedure is employed in most places, but if the detention center has a special scanner similar to those used at airports, these procedures are not necessary. However, such scanners are not present in every region. Subsequently, suspects are required to stay in isolation until their sentence is handed down. The duration of this stay can be uncertain, with some individuals spending years in these isolation facilities, never reaching a regular prison. Today you've learned about the lives of women in prisons, the conditions created for them, and the horrors that inmates face. Thank you for watching.